When Keanu Reeves quietly left just a $10 tip to see how the waitress would react, he expected disappointment or annoyance. Instead, her humble, grateful response, and what she chose to do with the money, stunned him so deeply that he ended up changing her life with one unforgettable gesture. The story often starts with a headline. Keanu Reeves left a $10 tip to test a waitress. Her response shocked him. People see something like that while scrolling before work or on a lunch break. The number is small enough to feel real. The word test suggests a quiet moral exam, and the promise of being shocked hints that somewhere under the surface, someone turned out to be unexpectedly kind or unexpectedly greedy. Whether that particular headline ever described a real moment or just an internet invention almost doesn't matter. What matters is that people click on it, share it, argue about it, because it touches a question they recognize. What do we do when no one important seems to be watching, and the amount on the table is small enough to walk away from? Keanu Reeves, fairly or unfairly, has become a kind of modern symbol for that question. Stories about him aren't usually about red carpets or award speeches. They are about someone seeing him give up his seat on the subway for a stranger, or quietly funding a crew member's medical bills, or taking a pay cut so other people could be hired. These stories circulate because they suggest a man who could reasonably ignore everyone around him choosing not to. They live in the gap between what we expect from fame and what we hope from humanity. But those stories also do something else. They plant a simple image in people's minds: a table, a modest bill, a tip left behind, a brief exchange, and the sense that this tiny, forgettable moment actually revealed something true about both people involved. That feeling doesn't belong to one actor. It exists quietly in places that never make the news. On a gray Tuesday afternoon, in late autumn, in a working-class neighborhood of a mid-sized city, a woman named Maria stepped off the bus and pulled her jacket tighter against the wind. She was 38, with a faint line between her eyebrows that made her look more serious than she felt. Her hair was tied back in a loose knot, and she carried a canvas bag with a change of shoes, a notepad, and a small plastic container of leftover rice and vegetables she planned to eat in the 10-minute gap between the lunch rush and the early dinner crowd. Maria worked at a diner just off the main road. It was the sort of place that hadn't really changed in 30 years. Red vinyl booths, faded pictures of classic cars on the walls, a glass pie case near the register. Truck drivers came in early for coffee, hospital staff came in late for pancakes, and in between, office workers and families passed through, leaving behind crumpled napkins and the thin, meaningful stack of bills that made up most of Maria's income. Her hourly wage kept the lights on. The tips paid for school shoes, groceries, and the half a tank of petrol or bus tickets that kept her world moving. On the bus that day, Maria had glanced down at her phone and seen a familiar kind of headline floating past in her news feed. It was that Keanu Reeves tip story or something close to it. The exact numbers and phrasing blurred with all the others she'd seen, but the idea was the same. A famous man, a small tip, a test, and a surprising response from someone earning much less than him. She didn't click. Data on her phone plan was limited, and anyway, she knew how these stories went. Some people in the comments would say the waiter had no right to be upset about a small tip. Others would point out how much that money mattered to someone working for it. A few would call the whole thing made up. She tucked her phone back into her bag, but the idea stayed with her as she walked the last 2 blocks to the diner. $10, she thought. To some people, that was nothing. To her, on a good week, $10 meant a couple of extra lunches for her 2 children, or the difference between buying the nicer loaf of bread and the cheapest one on the shelf. It was bus fare to and from work for 2 days. It was a copay at the clinic if her youngest started coughing again. The story about the famous man and the waitress wasn't abstract to her. It was a quiet equation she lived every day. Inside the diner, the air smelled of coffee, onions, and the faint lingering sweetness of syrup that never quite went away, no matter how often the tables were wiped down. The bell over the door gave a half-hearted ring as she entered. Jamal, the line cook, looked up from the grill and lifted his chin in greeting. "Hey, Maria, you're on the floor today, 3 to close. They put you on Section B," he said, nodding toward the middle row of booths. She clocked in, tied on her apron, and began her routine without really thinking about it. Coffee pots refilled, sugar containers topped up, menus checked for stains. The lunchtime crowd had thinned, leaving behind scattered plates and the tired quiet that came when people had gone back to work. Her first table was a man in a reflective jacket, clearly a delivery driver. He sat with his shoulders slightly slumped, the kind of posture that came from long hours behind a wheel. "Afternoon," Maria said, offering him a menu. "You want coffee to start?" "Yes, please, black, and just, what's the cheapest thing that'll fill me up?" he asked with a tired half-smile. She glanced at the menu even though she already knew. "You could do the soup and grilled cheese combo. It's on special today. Comes with fries. That's pretty decent for the price." "Yeah, that sounds good," he said, and pulled a folded stack of small bills from his pocket, checking them in a quick, familiar motion that told her he was doing mental math. When his food came, Maria slid an extra handful of fries onto his plate, more than the standard portion, a small adjustment that would only be noticed if someone was counting one by one. When he finished his meal and asked for a coffee refill, she topped his cup without writing it down on his ticket. It wasn't much. Maybe $1 of uncharged coffee, a few extra potatoes. It was the sort of thing she did almost automatically when she sensed someone was stretching their money. He left 3 crumpled $1 bills on the table. For a moment, she thought about the comments she hadn't read under that Keanu Reeves story, people arguing over what counted as a good tip. She picked up the money and tucked it into her apron. $3 on a small check was more generous than it looked from his side. There was a difference between a small tip because someone didn't care and a small tip because that was what they had. Later in the afternoon, a young couple came in with a little girl who couldn't have been more than 4. The child pointed joyfully at the pie case, leaving sticky fingerprints on the glass. The parents laughed apologetically and ordered burgers and milkshakes. The girl got pancakes shaped like a smiley face, with banana slices for eyes. When they were done, the father pulled out a card to pay, and as Maria took the receipt, she saw he had written in a tip of $10 on a bill of around 25. "Thank you," she said genuinely as she picked it up. $10 in one place felt like a small piece of good fortune. She thought suddenly of the headline on her phone and smiled to herself. No test, no cameras. Just a young family who hadn't had to squeeze the bill into the last few notes in their wallet. She slipped the 10 into the deeper pocket of her apron, the one she tried not to touch until the end of her shift, so she wouldn't chip away at it with small purchases on the way home. In her mind, she had already assigned it a purpose. Milk, apples, maybe a small treat for the kids if the numbers worked out. It was a quiet habit now, turning money into groceries in her head as soon as she held it. The afternoon drifted by. A group of college students came in, loud and full of restless energy, splitting checks and counting coins. An older woman ordered tea and toast and took an hour to eat it, staring out the window as if she were waiting for someone who didn't arrive. Maria moved between tables, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, sharing the same small jokes and polite questions that made up most of her interactions. It was early evening, that in-between time when the sky outside was beginning to dim, and the fluorescent lights inside felt a little harsher by contrast, when a teenage boy walked in alone. He hovered near the entrance for a moment, backpack slung over one shoulder, his hair damp from the drizzle outside. He looked around as if he wasn't entirely sure he belonged there. "Sit anywhere you like," Maria called gently, and he chose a booth near the back, away from the windows. She brought him a menu. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a little red around the edges, the way they got when someone was tired or had been holding back frustration. "First time here?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, I'm just passing through. Is it okay if I charge my phone for a bit? I need to call my mom after I eat." "Sure," Maria said. "There's an outlet right under the counter by that side. Burger special is good today if you're hungry." He ordered the burger special and a soda. Nothing extravagant. When the food came, he ate quietly, glancing periodically at his phone as it charged, his leg bouncing under the table in a steady rhythm. She noticed his clothes were a little thin for the weather, the sleeves of his hoodie too short on his wrists. When he finished, she brought the check and laid it face down on the table, the way she always did. It was a simple total, $11.78 before tax, just under 15 with everything. She went to refill the napkin holders at the next table, giving him a moment. A minute later, she heard the particular rustle of someone going through their pockets again and again, and the sharp intake of breath that came with it. I'm so sorry," the boy whispered when she came back. He was pale now, his hands clenched together on the table. "I think I lost my wallet. I had it on the bus. I know I did, and now I've checked my backpack like 3 times. I don't know what happened." He looked mortified, as if he expected her to raise her voice or accuse him of trying to leave without paying. The words tumbled out in a rush. I just came from a job interview across town, and I haven't eaten all day, and I was going to go straight home after this. And I swear I had enough money when I came in. I can't find it." Maria stood there, check in hand, the bustle of the diner softening around the edges. She had dealt with people who tried to walk out on bills before, but this didn't feel like that. The fear in his voice sounded too real, too young. "Okay," she said quietly. "Take a breath, it's all right, these things happen." Behind her, she could feel the presence of the manager at the register, looking over periodically. The restaurant had a policy: no free meals without approval. If someone couldn't pay, they were supposed to leave a name and number, and the debt would be written in a small notebook that mostly gathered dust. She glanced at the check. She thought about her own wallet, the cash in her apron. She had made about $12 in tips that afternoon so far, including that one $10 bill she'd tucked away so carefully. After the bus fare home, she would still have enough to pick up a few essentials at the discount grocery store. It wouldn't be a comfortable week, but it would be manageable. If she used the $10 to cover this boy's meal, the numbers shifted. Bus fare would have to come from somewhere else. Maybe she'd walk part of the way tomorrow morning if the weather held. Maybe she'd buy the cheaper, thinner bread her children didn't like as much and skip the apples for a few days. The boy was still talking, stumbling over his words. "I can leave my phone here or my backpack, or I can call my mom to come, but she doesn't get off work until late, and she doesn't have a car, and I just—" "Hey," Maria cut in gently, "look at me." He looked up, surprised. "It's okay," she said. "You're not the first person this has happened to. You won't be the last." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then made a decision that felt both suddenly heavy and strangely simple. "I've got you," she said. "Don't worry about it." His forehead creased. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm going to take care of it," she replied. "Your meal's covered." "You what? No, you don't have to do that. I can." "It's done," she said, more firmly now, not because she was angry, but because she knew he would argue otherwise. "You needed to eat. You ate. You tried to pay. That's enough for today." He sat there, stunned. The soda glass in front of him had a ring of condensation on the table, slowly spreading. "Can I at least," he swallowed, "can I at least write down my name and number? I'll pay you back when I can, I promise." "If it will make you feel better, sure," Maria said, and slid a napkin and pen across the table. He wrote carefully, pressing the pen so hard the letters indented through to the napkin beneath. When he handed it back, his hand shook a little less. "Thank you," he said. The words sounded inadequate to both of them. Maria took the check to the register. The manager, a middle-aged man named Carl, looked at her over the top of his reading glasses. "He couldn't pay?" Carl asked. "Lost his wallet," she said. "Looked pretty shaken about it." Carl glanced at the check. "We can put it in the book." "It's okay," Maria said. "I'll cover it out of my tips." Carl shrugged. "If you're sure, just ring it in and put the cash with it so the drawer balances." She nodded. At the register, she pulled the $10 bill from her apron, smoothing it out before placing it next to the check. She added a few extra coins and small bills from the other pocket to cover the rest. The drawer closed with its usual dull click. Back at the boy's table, she handed him his phone, which he'd forgotten he'd left charging at the outlet. "Don't lose this too," she said, giving him a small smile. He almost laughed. "I'll try not to." As he left, he paused by the door and looked back at her. "Really?" he said. "Thank you, you didn't have to." "Just get home safe," Maria replied. That's enough. After he was gone, Jamal came out from the kitchen to grab a coffee. He had caught glimpses of the exchange from the pass-through window. "You covered that kid's meal?" he asked, pouring himself a cup. "Yeah," Maria said, wiping down the now-empty booth. "He lost his wallet, looked like he hadn't eaten all day." Jamal shook his head, not in disapproval, more in a kind of resigned admiration. "You and your soft heart," he said. Then he remembered something and snapped his fingers. "Didn't you say earlier you got a whole 10 from that one family? That was your big win for the day." She shrugged, half smiling. "Guess I ran a little social experiment on myself," she said, thinking for a moment of that headline on her phone, "Famous actors and tips as tests. Turns out $10 goes fast." Jamal chuckled and went back to the grill. The diner hummed on. Another table was seated, another order came in. Plates clattered, coffee poured. Outside, the sky grew darker, soft rain tapping at the windows. When Maria's shift finally ended, she untied her apron and counted the remaining tips on the back counter. The total was modest. Covering the boys' meal had taken most of what she'd earned that afternoon. Still, there was enough for bus fare home and a few basics at the grocery store if she was careful. Walking out into the cool night air, she slipped her hands into her jacket pockets and felt the thinness of her wallet. She was not someone for whom generosity came without a cost. The small sacrifice was real, a slight tightening in her chest as she recalculated her week. Maybe she'd stretch what was already in the pantry a bit further. Maybe the kids would have souped 2 nights in a row. But alongside that small worry, there was also a quiet, steady feeling she couldn't quite name. It wasn't pride. It wasn't the grand satisfaction that came from doing something dramatic. It was more like the simple rightness of having responded to what was in front of her without looking away. At the grocery store, she moved slowly down the aisles, comparing prices, choosing the store-brand cereal over the colorful box her children loved. She picked up apples, then put 2 back, settling on 4 instead of 6. At the bread section, she hesitated for a moment between the thick loaf and the thin one, then chose the thinner, cheaper option, running her thumb along the plastic as if feeling the difference ahead of time. At home, her children ran to the door to greet her. She set down the bags, kissed their foreheads, and asked about their days. She didn't tell them about the boy at the diner. Not because she was hiding it, but because, in her mind, it was just one more thing that had happened, like the rain or the late bus, or the fact that someone had forgotten a scarf on a chair. Days turned into weeks. The memory of that Tuesday folded itself into the general blur of work and home and small decision after small decision. Maria kept showing up, serving coffee, carrying plates, leaving the diner with numb feet and a head full of half-heard conversations. Then one afternoon about a month later, the bell over the diner door rang, and a familiar, uncertain figure stepped inside. It was the boy, this time without the damp hoodie. He wore a slightly too big button-down shirt and clean jeans. His backpack was gone, replaced by a simple messenger bag slung across his chest. Beside him stood a woman in her 40s, with the same set to her shoulders that he had, wearing a supermarket name badge on her jacket. Maria recognized him immediately. The look on his face was different now, less frightened, but still carrying a trace of shyness. He glanced around until his eyes landed on her. Relief softened his features. "Hi," he said, approaching the counter. I don't know if you remember me." "Lost your wallet," Maria said before he could finish. "Burger special, needed to call your mom." He laughed, a small exhale of disbelief. "Yeah, that was me." The woman next to him stepped forward. "I'm his mother," she said, offering a hand. "I'm Carla. My son hasn't stopped talking about you for weeks. He made me promise we'd come back when I got a day off." Maria shook her hand, a little taken aback. "You didn't have to do that." "Maybe," Carla replied, "but we needed to. He came home that night without his wallet but with a full stomach, and I was ready to march in here and demand to know what had happened. Then he told me there was this waitress who just," she paused, searching for the words, "who just decided to be kind." The boy reached into his bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I got the job," he said almost shyly. The one I was interviewing for that day. It's nothing big, just a part-time thing at the warehouse, but it's helping. I wanted to pay you back for the meal, and for not making me feel like an idiot when everything went wrong." He held out the envelope. Maria took it, feeling the thin rectangle of paper inside. There was money in there, she could tell by the weight. She opened the flap enough to peek 2 folded bills, a 10 and a 5, $15, more than she had spent on his meal. "You really didn't have to," she began. He cut her off gently, echoing her words from before. "If it makes you feel better," he said, "you're not just getting it from me. My mom insisted on putting in some too." Carla smiled. "It's not much," she said, "but it matters to us, and we wanted you to know that what you did mattered." Maria felt a warmth rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the heat from the kitchen. "Well," she said softly, "thank you, I'm glad it worked out." They didn't stay long. The boy had to get to work. Carla had errands to run. Before they left, the boy hesitated. I've been trying to notice more," he said. "Like you did, when people need a little help. I can't do much, but I've started picking up an extra sandwich sometimes when I get paid and leaving it for this guy who sits near the bus stop. It's not heroic or anything. It just feels normal now." Maria nodded, feeling unexpectedly moved. "Normal is good," she said. "Normal is where most of us live." After they left, she slipped the envelope into her apron. During a quiet moment between tables, she opened it again and looked at the 2 bills. $15, not life-changing, not the kind of sum that would ever make a headline, but it was enough to cover a week's worth of bus fares with a little left over, enough to buy the better bread and the extra apples. Later on her break, she pulled out her phone and scrolled absent-mindedly through the news. Another celebrity story floated past, photos of Keanu Reeves on a subway, a snippet about him taking pictures with fans, a rehashed anecdote about him being polite to a stranger. Someone in the comments wrote, "We don't deserve this man," and someone else replied, "There are people like this everywhere, you just don't see them." Maria thought about that, about the boy and his mother, about the delivery driver counting his dollars, about the older woman silently stirring her tea, about the customers who tipped generously and the ones who left nothing at all, and the little calculations she did in her head every day. The story in the headline and the story in her life had more in common than they seemed. A table, a small amount of money, a choice that didn't change the world but changed something for one person. The difference was that no one was pointing a camera at her. No one was framing her actions as a test or promising viewers that they would be shocked. In reality, most kindness looked like that, unphotographed, unremarkable to anyone except the person on the receiving end. A waitress quietly using her tip to pay for someone else's meal. A teenager remembering that grace and trying in his own small way to pass it on. A mother taking a day off to say thank you, even for something that could have easily been left in the past. Somewhere out there, on a film set or in a coffee shop or on a subway car, Keanu Reeves might have been doing something thoughtful for a stranger on that same day, or on a different one. It was comforting to think so. But it was just as comforting, perhaps more so, to know that similar acts were happening all the time in places like Maria's diner, carried out by people whose names would never trend on a screen. The idea that kindness belongs to the famous is a story we tell because it's easy to share. The reality is quieter. It lives in small decisions made by people who can least afford to be generous, who do it anyway, not because they're being tested, and not because a headline will be written about them, but because in that ordinary moment, with that ordinary bill on the table, they recognize themselves in someone else. $10 in different hands can mean wildly different things. It can be an afterthought, a rounding error, a casual test. It can be the margin between enough and not quite. It can move in a circle, given as a tip, handed over at a register, returned weeks later in an envelope, as if reminding us that what we pass on rarely disappears. It changes form and direction, but the intent behind it leaves a trace. In the end, the true value isn't in the number itself, but in the quiet choices wrapped around it. A famous actor sliding a bill under a coffee cup. A waitress opening her hand and letting go of what she counted on. A teenager who thought the world was indifferent, discovering that, just once, it was. Most of these stories will never be told. They will never begin with a dramatic title or end with millions of views. They will live and die in the space between two people, in the brief contact of a bill changing hands, in the softening of someone's shoulders when they realize they are seen. But if you look closely, in diners, on buses, in supermarkets, in the places cameras don't linger, you'll find that the same human meaning runs through them all. Fame can amplify it, but it does not create it. The quiet kindness that people hope to glimpse in someone like Keanu Reeves already exists, every day in the lives of people like Maria, unseen except by the few who happen to be there when a small, simple choice is made.